So this is going to be a CRWorks EMU assembly guide. You're going to start over here with what we call the flight pod, with your SFGs, your mid plate, your base plate, your four arms, and then you're going to need these little brace mounts, we call them, and your SFG mounts, as well as these four tiny standoffs. That's completely separate from your electronics pod, which is sitting right over here. So to get started, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pay attention on these little brace mounts. The sharp bump is facing up, and so these will go on the front and back of the pod and of the flight pod and be assembled. So you're going to want to face those up and then stick these little standoffs in the rear holes like this. It can be harder depending on whether you're using stiffer TPU or not. I'm using pretty stiff TPU, and that went in nice and easy. So I'm going to do that. Once you're done there, you're going to end up with four little standoffs that look like this. Remember, the little sharp part is going to be facing up, and that's where your horizontal standoffs are going to go. So you're going to take one of the longer ones, not the shorter ones. These are the electronics pod standoffs. These are the 40 millimeters for either of the brace plates, which you need all of them for. If you are using the pod, you only need 2 of these for these mounts. So you're going to stick them in sideways like so. Hard to do one-handed. Stick them in like this. And then you're going to do the same with this other one. So you get left with an assembly that looks like this. And you can see the sharp bump is on the upper side of this. So there's 2 sides of this. There's the shallow bump, that's going to go on the bottom, and there's the sharper bump that's going to go up, and you're going to have 2 of these, front and rear. One's going to come all the way back over here, and the other one, once assembled, is going to go on the front. So once those are assembled, the next thing you're going to want to do is take your side force generator mounts. They look like this. They might be a little cleaner than my print, but I haven't cleaned them up just yet. You're going to slide them into each of the arms with the notch facing the outside of the arm. So you're going to place them this way on each of the arms so that the notch faces away from the quad. And pop that one down in. You're going to do that to all 4. Once all 4 of these side force generator mounts are in, you're going to want to install the side force generators, 1 per side. We're assembling these first because it's much easier to get these on when the arms aren't mounted than if we mount the arms and then have to do it, though that is technically possible. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your side force generator, and you see there's going to be a little hook on the end and a little notch that's going to stick up. We also have a section to put a screw through it if you really wanted to, but that's unnecessary. These mounts are just going to stretch over. It's easiest if you print them hollow, but I've printed mine solid for strength, which is going to make it much harder to mount, but still possible. And you see the little hole on the bottom, that's going to be for sticking your 2.5 millimeter driver, or up, you can probably fit an M3 in there, and yanking on, because you want to stretch these things over, and it can be pretty hard with this TPU. So you're going to take your side force generator, and you're going to hook it into the bottom of the TPU like this and lever that way. And once you get it started, you can kind of take your driver and pull through the hole and wiggle this, and it'll go in. It's just going to be pretty tough. So I've got one of the SFGs partially on right now, and so you'll see I've torqued like this. I even had to put on a glove. Would recommend. The carbon can be kind of sharp, and you'll torque it and you'll push at the same time. And once you've pushed enough, the notch here will slip into its groove, and that's what's happened here. And this is where you'll finish this off by shoving this through the hole and kind of levering it and wiggling it so that it fully seats. And this is what it'll look like mostly fully mounted. You still might see a little gap there, but you'll see that on the end, focus, the end, the little tab that's on the end of these, that little nub, has latched over the end of the SFG mount. And so that's one side done. It'll all tighten up a little, like this gap will go away once you've secured the arms to the mid plate. But right now you just want to build these in pairs, so that I'm going to do this arm next, then I'm going to get over to these ones, which are all exactly the same process. Now I've just got one arm mounted. This is also where it's important to note orientation. So this is going to be my rear left arm, and this is going to be my front left arm. Same over here, I've got rear right, front right. And you don't want to mount this upside down like this, which it's impossible to do, but I've mounted it. I've done this before, where I've ended up with an SFG like that. So you want to pay attention, and I always line up the arms, and that makes it easier. So you're going to line it up and put that through there, and then mount it through the bottom, just like this one, but on the front. And you'll see I've done the same thing here. This one's fully on, this one's partially on. I've pushed it forward and jammed it in until the notch on top, this notch, the top notch, has seated into its slot in the arm. And then this mount is not fully secured. So now I'm going to take this, I'm going to wiggle it up, and I'm going to wiggle this mount up and on into its groove. And one downside of this is you do scratch the carbon a little, but it's underneath everything and it won't affect much. And so now that I've completed that, you see I've got my arms set. They're kind of lined up there. They won't be perfectly because we haven't actually mounted them. We're just sticking the SFG together, but we make them in pairs. And so that's my left side of the drone, and this is going to be my right side, where I'm just going to do the same exact process. And so once you've done that, you've got both your left and your right sides assembled together. And then I've built them like this, so you can see that how the drone, start to see how the drone's going to go together. So the next thing you're going to want to do is assemble your mid plate and then your bottom plate together. And this part is really not too hard. You're just going to grab some of the screws, and I'll get out the right ones here in a second, and put the bottom plate on the bottom, mid plate through the middle, and then these little brace mounts we assembled earlier are going to go on the front and the back. And I kept saying top earlier, and that's because the sharp edge will go up. You want this bar to be elevated. You don't want to flip it over and have that bar be going down, because then it won't line up with your screws. So I'm going to take my base plate and I'm going to find a countersunk screw. I think this is the correct one, but it could be too long, and we'll check that. I'm going to put it through the bottom plate, and then I'm going to stick it through one of these arms, like so. And then I will gently and lightly, I won't fully seat anything yet. I'm just going to screw it into one of these press nuts a little, not so it's tight. And I'm going to do that for all these screws until all of them are in, and then we'll tighten them down. I just want to show what the difference here. One of these screws I picked up was the correct screw because it's flush and it's somewhat tight. It's still not definitely not fully tight. But this screw, that's too long. It's sticking up. It's gonna go into the flight controller or something. Anyway, this is too long. So we're gonna want screws that sit flush, just like this. And that goes for all of these. So once you find one, you can go use it to measure the rest of the screws to figure out which ones you need. So now I've now mounted the outside screws on the arms somewhat loosely. That'll allow me to wiggle the arms around a bit to get them aligned with these 4 middle screws. They'll use the same length countersunk screws. We want these all to be flush so that they don't go into the battery. And then once those are tight, you can tighten down the arms. So now, with all of these loose, the middle screws are in, and you can see none of these are tight. Some of them are slightly tighter than others, but they're all backed out a quarter turn. And that's because that allows us freedom to wiggle the arms around just a little, just a hair, so that these are easy to align. We don't really want them to be tough to align. So then what we're going to do is tighten down all the arms. And just to make this easier, we're going to do it in an X pattern. So I'm going to tighten down this arm. Then I'm going to go to the next diagonal from it. I'm going to tighten down that diagonal. Then I'm going to go to this arm and tighten down the diagonal from it. This is going to settle the plate down flat without too much twist in it, and that isn't that important, except it makes it much easier to screw things in. And so now that the 4 outer screws are tightened, we're just going to do exactly the same thing. Back one, diagonal to the other one, diagonal to this one, oops, diagonal, and diagonal. And you're going to want to get them tighter than that. I was doing it one-handed, so I can't get much tighter than that. But once we have it like that, we're going to throw in our brace mounts. And so these are going to be slightly hard to slide in because those are tightened, but if you can either loosen them up a little or just slide them in, they'll go. And I'll get that done. So you're going to slide in those brace mounts that you've assembled earlier, like this. Once again, sharp notch facing up. You see how it lines up with the carbon nicely there. The next thing we're going to do is take these little countersunk screws, and these are real small. These are these extremely little screws. And so you're going to take those, and these are such small standoffs, that's why they're such small screws. And we're just going to mount those like so. Throw one in there, and we're going to find another. Let's play find the tiny screw. These even are too big, I think. Yeah, one of these. It's even smaller than the other small countersunk screws. So you're just going to find the smallest ones. Do the same thing, and you'll find 4 of those. So now we've got those in. The next thing we can do, we can install our arm socks. These can go on before or after the SFGs. They can be slightly easier to put on before, but I just put them on after. And so you're going to want to line it up like so. And so as I was saying, you can slip these arm socks over with the SFGs on, so I've done that. However, we had a slight problem. I hadn't made the mirrored version yet. I just finished that. So that's going on the printer now, but I won't be mounting those just yet because I don't have them printed. So those are going to go on the printer, and we'll just ignore that for now. So this is your base plate assembled. The only thing you haven't screwed in yet is this on the bottom. Okay, never mind. 2 things. One, these stay blank until you mount your battery tray. That's what those are for. And 2, these holes down here, that will mate up to these 2 press nuts on the bottom of your electronics bay. That's our key differentiator for serviceability. All you have to do is take these 2 screws out, this one here and this one here, and your whole electronics pod will just come off. And you can service this, or you can replace an ESC, whatever. So your flight pod is now done, and we're going to work on the electronics pod. So your electronics pod, relatively speaking, pretty simple. You've got the countersunk side for the bottom and the non-countersunk side. Non-countersunk side the non-countersunk side is going to face up so that it mounts like that. You're just going to mount some standoffs here with some countersunk screws, and here, and all the back, and then you'll mount your top plate on that. And from there, you have to mount your flight stack screws as well on the because they're also countersunk, since we're mating this directly onto the bottom plate, which adds strength. We've got, if you add it all up, something like 8 mil arms, 3 mil pieces here, 2 mils for the electronic pod, something like 10-12 millimeters of carbon. But that comes with the downside of having to have countersunk hardware. Not a huge deal, but you'll find it all over here. So I'm going to get assembling, and I'll show you through the process. So I've mounted all the standoffs except for 2. There's one thing to note on these last 2 standoffs that go all the way at the back here, and that is that they are not countersunk. And the reason is they don't need to be. They hang off the end, and they're not flush with the rest of the frame. These are just out in the air, so there's no reason to countersink them, so we didn't. So you're just going to take 2 of your small little screws here and just use normal screws. So now I've mounted all my standoffs. I'm going to mount these stack screws as well, which are also countersunk. Oops. And what you're going to do for that is you're just going to stick them through either the 20 by 20 holes or the 30 by 30 holes on the outside. Same back here. This is our VTX mounting, 20 by 20, 30 by 30, or if neither of those work for you, just stick it back there with some double-sided tape. So I'm just going to screw these nuts down in for my stack nuts to put on the bottom, same as a normal 5-inch build. To help with this though, because I don't like it disassembling my 7-inch quads very much, and they don't need it a whole lot, especially the EMU. It's completely encased, water resistant, so I don't have to disassemble it much. But for that, I'm going to add some blue Loctite around all. I've added it on every screw after I got done doing the video. So I would suggest running some blue Loctite, especially on these stack screws. You don't want these coming loose. So now your electronics pod is mostly done. I've done 30 by 30 mounting for my ESC and flight controller up in the middle. I've mounted some screws, though I've left them loose, for my HD0 20 by 20 VTX going in the back. Now all that's left is to pop on this top plate, which will be screwed down. And then we have mounting back here. If you're using a lower profile VTX especially, you can mount a fan. A little Raspberry Pi fan, specifically, usually. Those can keep your VTX really cool if you have room, especially with these newer gigantic HD0 VTXs. It can be a little harder to fit. And when I say gigantic, I'm talking the freestyle VTXs, not obviously the little Race V3 boards. If you threw a Race V3 back here, you can still fit that fan and keep it cool. You can do it with an analog VTX as well, or your DJI VTXs. And if you really wanted the fan, but we're running one of your bigger VTXs, you could even mount the fan up top. The other thing you need to know is to mount your camera up here up front. I'm going to grab my camera mount right now and show that to you. So the only thing left to do is mount your camera up front, just by slipping it down the standoffs. You're going to want to put the camera in first before you mount it. The other thing, you throw your antenna mount on the back here. I like this little luminaire mount we've got. So then you're going to have your electronics pod assembled like this, and you're going to have your flight pod assembled like so. And the last thing you're going to do is stick them on top of each other. Voila. And then just screw them together with 2 screws on the bottom through these holes here and here. And so once you've assembled it, you'll have those little screws. I let them stick out a little bit, and I use Loctite. The last thing to do is going to be throw your pod on, or your brace plates. Your brace plates would use these mounts if you wanted to run them. They're much more happy to flip, but they're not quite as fast as the pod. So the pod just kind of slips over like that, and you'll know that it's lined up because it'll line up with your camera mount. And then you'll see those little brace mounts we added earlier. It might take some pulling, but it'll line up there. And then same on the other side. So then all you got to do is either use these provided screws with a long driver and carefully screw it in, not cross-threading it, or you can purchase some thumb screws. You can see the thumb screws located there. I don't have any with me, so I won't be running them right now. I'll just use some washers and some normal M3 screws, which is no problem to do. It's just a little harder to take on and off because the arms sort of get in the way of screwing them in. You want to run washers if you're doing that because it might pull through the TPU. Same thing down here where your battery tray will fold over. You're going to want to run washers on these screws. Otherwise it can pull through. We've undersized the holes, but after a lot of abuse, TPU tends to stretch, and washers help it stay in place. I hope you enjoy your new 7-inch CRWorks EMU.